afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. We are so delighted to have you here on this call for Celebrating Refugees, Events and Messages that Move People. This is Rachel Steinhardt. I'm the Deputy Director of Welcoming America. A really exciting lineup for you today, and I want to just begin by sharing our deep appreciation to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, who support Welcoming America's technical assistance to foster greater understanding and support for refugees makes this webinar series possible. We really want this webinar to be an interactive experience, so please feel free to use the chat and Q&A features on the right hand of your screen to connect with us. Our speakers on this call are going to be responding to questions at the end of the toward the end of the webinar. But in the meantime, feel free to send in your questions throughout, and we'll also be asking you questions as we move along. Let's get started. To begin by taking a look at today's agenda. We're going to be starting with an overview, giving a sneak preview of our new messaging toolkit, Reframing Refugees, which, if you had registered earlier for the call, should be in your inbox for you to take a look at. After that, we're going to be walking through some key themes. So really delighted to have on this call today some excellent speakers from the field, including Deb Coffey, who's going to be talking about the amazing work that she's been leading along with other community partners in Utah around World Refugee Day. We've also got a great lineup actually here at our Welcoming America offices in Atlanta. Some folks from the Coalition of Refugee Service Agencies, CRSA, Emily Pelton, Matthew George, and J.D. McCrary. So we're delighted to have them here to talk about their work in Georgia. From them, and then we're going to come back to talk a little bit more about the power of stories and some of the opportunities that folks can engage on around celebrating refugees in your communities going forward. Let's dive in. Ask Hannah to go back one slide. Great. So I want to just begin by thinking about how communications for us here at Welcoming America has always been a really key part of our work, really part of all that we do in expanding Americans' understanding of immigration, of immigrants and refugees and how they impact our communities and families. But what I'm excited about to chat with all of you today is this vision of communications as being not just a tactic or a sort of ancillary piece of our work, but really part of this big vision of transforming the way that people think about immigrants and refugees in their communities. And I want to think with you today about how we can use reframing to really reshape the way that society sees immigrants and refugees, and all of you are a key part of that. So that will be our conversation today. So, play the word association game, and I said the word refugee. What do you think comes to mind for any Americans? Think about that. Feel free to use the chat feature there on the right-hand side of your screen. What do you think comes to mind? Okay, dirty, somebody said. Great. Is camp, or neat, or defer. And let's slide here. The screenshot that I took when I did a Google search, a Google image search on the word refugees. I hear that the word refugee often gets associated with many of the things that you see depicted here: need, want, vulnerable, somebody said, big circumstances that shape the beginning of the experience that refugees have before they come to this country. But if we think about the second part of refugees' experience, the story of their lives here in the U.S., what words would that bring to mind? Use your chat button. What would refugees in the U.S. Great, hopeful, great, striving, hardworking, excellent. Positive and more accurate, people associated the word refugee with these kinds of words. Words like courageous, resilient, resourceful, diverse, all the things that I'm seeing come across the chat line. Also, were, business, voter, parent, community leader, person of faith, all of those and identities that exist in our communities. Come back in 2 years to do that Google search again, and in seeing the kind of images that I see here, these kinds of images, positive images about how refugees' lives change and how our communities change once refugees are settled and stable. Wouldn't it be so much easier, and the transition to success for refugees be so much easier, if stories that were told in our communities looked more like this one, which would be a story from Cleveland about successful small business owners from Bhutan. That's the power of reframing, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I think that this quote from Anjalis really captures why this is so important. She says this diversity has given a great from refugees, and that refugees can't simply be viewed as a burden. They are the survivors. So I think that's the imperative that's ahead of us, and we're going to be talking about how we can use that through reframing and through messaging. As mentioned, we are officially releasing with great enthusiasm this new messaging toolkit, and I don't have time to go through all of it today, but I want you to know that in it you find all of the nuts and bolts of how to reframe refugees, including both some field and research-tested message themes, along with tons of practical tools and ideas for incorporating them into your work. And it was really important for us at Welcoming America to make this a really practical guide. And we did that thanks to a group of incredible leaders from the resettlement community who participated in our communication learning circle. And I just want to recognize them for being really the genesis of the idea behind this toolkit, and also for providing a lot of really invaluable advice and guidance that made this possible. And if you look in the introduction to the toolkit, you can see who all of them were. Some of them are called today, so thank you to them. Let's dig in a little bit and talk about some of the themes and principles that guide us in our messaging work. What to talk about is that your audience trusts you. So we all know that our lives would be so much easier if we could get up every day and interact only with people that had the same perspectives and opinions and experiences and agreed with everything we said, but not the world that most of us live in, and it probably isn't the world that we would want to live in. These are the people that we most need to reach, are not the people we are interacting with, listening to every day. And the people we most need to influence, and who are often the ones that have the biggest doubts about resettlement, or maybe they're simply the folks in our communities who would be our biggest supporters but don't really know that our work exists or who refugees are, individuals that need to hear from us in ways that their perspective and their experiences. And we need to answer for them the question of, so what? And we need to do it in ways that make sense to them as elected officials, or as civic leaders, or as faith leaders, business leaders, educators, in this case, from the police. As part of this work, but the most important part is recognizing that we are not our own audience. Great. The second principle is the idea that perception trumps reality and trumps logic. And this can seem a little counterintuitive, but it's important to recognize that a person's opinion and the way that they see and understand our work isn't really based on reality. It's based on their perception of reality. And what we do, but often don't do, is listen to and begin to accept our audience's perceived reality, and then to messages that resonate with it. Use these messages to reshape perception. So our communicators is really to tap into beliefs, into emotions, and tap into values. And they understand through research, which is called confirmation bias, which basically means that no matter how solid a fact or statistic is, if it doesn't fit into our belief systems or our worldview or frame, we're likely to reject it. This is that by presenting facts to people who don't already agree with our frame, we're actually going to be able to change their perception around something. So sometimes if we're presenting facts to people who don't already agree with us, we're not actually going to be able to influence them. And it can even backfire, sometimes pushing people into a position of deeper opposition. Has happened to anyone on the call today? Trying to act, maybe making a big presentation to an audience, and it's just not sinking in, or maybe people are even actively resisting it. Folks on the call? Great. Frustrating hearing. It is frustrating. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to get around that. This isn't to say that facts don't matter, but it's just to underscore that facts matter if they are the right facts in the right context. And people have to be ready to hear your information, and they have to be primed to believe it in order to actually process it so the information sticks with them. The way we do that, the way we prepare this sort of ground for our information is through stories. Because stories carry an emotional weight that are much effective. And we're going to come back to this idea of stories and share some examples. But part of work is about framing and trying to change the way that we talk about things. I illustrate this with a little example that I'm going to run through here with my colleague Hannah. We're going to play it out. Now, we asked a number of you in developing this toolkit to give us your toughest questions. What are some of the toughest questions you get in community meetings or presentations that you're doing? So we're going to walk this through with one tough question that we know folks often get.
We're having some refugees, but we can't be overwhelmed. How many exactly are coming?
So our instinct with that question is that we want to respond with a fact or with a number. We want to be sort of on the defense. It's going to matter if we say that 10 refugees are coming every year or 7 refugees are coming every year. If the person's understanding is that refugees are actually taking away something from them. So instead, with reading, we're going to offer a proactive response. So can you ask that question one more time?
We're happy to welcome some refugees, but we can't be overwhelmed. How many exactly are coming?
Well, many American cities have actually been losing population, and news have really been key to reviving urban areas, sprucing houses and neighborhoods, launching and supporting small businesses, and improving schools. And I don't know if you know this, but just down the street, Mohammed has opened this new grocery store. It's employing 10 people from the community. I was in there the other day. It's incredible to see how these newcomers are starting new lives in our community. And in fact, areas all over the country have welcomed new Americans, and those places have seen their fortunes rise and opportunities expand for everyone. And the fact that local economies aren't zero-sum games where there's one pie that needs to be sliced up for everyone. In fact, newcomers help make a bigger pie for all of us to get a piece of. Now, that frame, if you want to talk about numbers, great, but sometimes to be able to set the stage and give the context for the numbers first. How does that strike you? What do folks on the call think about that? And a comment from somebody on the call saying, I can't see everyone's comments, and unfortunately, our webinar system doesn't allow us to do that, but we'll try as much as we can to be able to share some of the thoughts and questions that are coming through. Please jump in to share your thoughts. So to that. And says, I guess using a different terminology could also help correct the perception, newcomers versus refugees. Absolutely, and I'm going to come back to that point in a little bit. It's a great point. One of our participants says sometimes even just hearing the name Muhammad may be a trigger for people who already have fears and concerns. That's absolutely true, and I think our job is to keep retelling these stories over and over and over again, because that's what begins to chip away at some of those misperceptions. Great. Sometimes people can counter-argue about low-income populations within refugee populations, contribute to crime, and I think we can share with you some additional examples, both of statistics and also this idea of the pie growing, some of the messages you can want to mention here. I think this is the time to say that this messaging toolkit complements another toolkit that we have available that I'll share with you after the call called Stronger Together, which really reinforces these themes of the pie growing for everyone. Great. So let's move on to another theme, and that's the idea that values trump features. So if you know nothing about your work, and I came to your website or saw your flyer or brochure, what is the first thing that I read? And I really picture in your mind your own website or your own brochure and the first thing that it says on it. If the read explains the process of resettlement, tells me about the services that you offer, you may have already lost me. What I most care about is not how you go about your work. What I want to know is, does this matter to me? How does the work that you're doing fit with what I care about and my values? So be able to explain, to give people specifics, but with that, your work is founded on values. So it's important not to talk up programs or services that not matter to your entire audience. Talk about core values that animate your work, the values that your audiences share. So for us at Welcoming America, we like to start with talking about the value of what there are many other values that are out there that are important to you and to your community. And so maybe you can just take a moment and I can ask folks on the phone to share what are some of the values that are important for you in your community that you may share with your audiences. Steve in Michigan for the instant reaction of wanting to change his website tomorrow. Values do rule. I agree with that. Okay, thank you, Kara. Hard work is an important value that you may share with some of your audiences. What else? Great. Kindness, caring. These are all great ways to start off a conversation or to start off the messaging that you lead with in your materials. Dignity, great. Inclusiveness. Humanity, great. We are immigrants, and I think that's a great one. I just want to sort of qualify the "we are all immigrants" piece with something that we learned in our own work, which is, of course, that there are some people who don't see themselves as immigrants, and that's just something to be mindful of. Great. So let's all together messages that you're going to find in your toolkit. Some of you who attended earlier webinars where you gave feedback to actually help craft these. I'm going to be seeing these again. Some of them will be fresh for other folks. I really want to preface this by saying that all of these messages come from extensive research and field validation done, of course, in the field, but also in the broader immigrant rights field where some of these originated. And I want to express my gratitude to all of the research and the practitioners that were part of developing these, as well as to all of you for sharing your feedback and making these come to life. These here, you'll also find them in the toolkit. And again, with these frames, our goals are really to try to connect with the values and worldview of our audience, and then begin to build associations between the people we know who have settled here and their actual lives here. And we'll come back into that later. The first message is people. I'm just going to do this for folks. People is true today as it has been throughout history. People move to make a better life for themselves and their families. It's hard to move, to pack up everything and go to a new place. It takes courage. But you do in order to put food on the table, to provide for your family, or send your kids to a decent school. New Americans, and you optimize that for your community, new Tar Heels in the case of North Carolina, for example. New Americans who come as refugees move here for the promise of freedom and opportunity in this country and to escape persecution and violence. People move in order to improve life, and we believe that moving to make a better life for your family is one of the hardest things and one of the most American things a person can do. One of the values we hold dear to our hearts is a deeply rooted belief in the freedom to be who you want to be, say what you want to say, and go where you want to go. America is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's a good thing, so let's keep it that way. Great. That's the message. If you have reactions to that, feel free to start typing them into your chat. And we'll begin to talk about our next frame, which is Define America. America is a nation of values, founded on an idea that men and women are created equal. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that people have rights no matter what they look like or where they come from. So how we treat refugees reflects our commitment to the values that define us as Americans. We believe that families should stick together, that we should look out for each other, and that hard work should be rewarded. You see, not just about what you look like or were born that makes you American, how you live life and what you do that defines you here in this country. Refugees come here embody these American values. They have at all odds to leave behind discrimination, threats, and even violence. We're here to build a better, safer life is a quintessentially American thing to do. And learn to read, which is a unity of work. Adulterers, our country's strength is in our ability to work together as fellow Americans. From the street who cooks the food that you eat, to the woman who created an innovative new business in your town, new immigrants and refugees realize the value of working hard and doing your part in exchange for the blessings of liberty. As Americans, we all have a part to contribute, and we're better for having hard-working refugees as contributing members of our communities, who are customers in our stores, small business owners who pay payroll taxes, and neighbors who give to local churches and charities. We all have diverse backgrounds and many different places. We are united by deep respect for those who work hard for a living, shared commitment to the country we all call home. America's best when we all do our part and work together as one nation, indivisible and strong. So seeing one of the comments from our audience who's saying that America doesn't have values, people do, and they differ greatly. What Americans are you talking about? I think that that's absolutely right. And of course, what we work is that you need to speak to values that are important for your community. Just recognize that we are pulling these messages from ideas tested nationally, both with the audience that I think we are trying to reach, and so that people from within the immigrant rights movement and the refugee movement have felt comfortable using. But you have to determine in your own community what you are most comfortable using and the values that really speak to the audiences you're trying to reach that you share. Great. Yeah, Omar says you need to adjust your message depending on who your audience is, and that's exactly correct. So, a few more thoughts before we move on to some of our great speakers today. The first is I just wanted to take a moment to talk about how we talk about the issue of legality. And you'll notice that nowhere in the messages that we shared do we specifically lift up the legal status of refugees. And of course, understand that that distinction can be helpful, especially when you're talking maybe to an employer. But in general, we really encourage those in the field not to reinforce negative perceptions of immigrants or other immigrants under the bus by highlighting legal status of refugees. While we know that it's not refugee status that makes them special, wonderful, I think we're better served when all immigrants are recognized as contributors rather than threats. Somebody pointed to this earlier, that using language like New Americans can be helpful as well, but I think really using messages that speak to unity would be really helpful. Final point that I want to share today is that refugees and resettlement have something of value that we're offering to communities. For myself and my own experience, in particular those of us who worked in service organizations, oftentimes our practice advocate in terms of needs. And of course, we see needs all around us every day in the community. But when we only speak to needs, this can reinforce the image of refugees as needy takers, rather than present the reality, which is that refugees and organizations that serve refugees are bringing all kinds of new resources, new ideas, new perspectives, are enriching communities in countless ways. And so it's better to be able to start a conversation from what we can offer. I think that these messages that we've shared today, a lot of the themes that are reinforced in the toolkit that I think you'll continue to hear over the course of this call, reinforce both this, that there is a lot of value to speaking to refugees and refugee resettlement as an asset in communities. I've seen a lot of success with through our own Welcoming America and our partners' work in communities across the country. Along this, I want to move on to introduce our speakers today. I think we're really excited to hear their stories around how they've been applying messaging, but also celebrating refugees and their communities. And I'll begin first by introducing Deb Coffey, who comes to us from the Department of Workforce Services, where she is the operations manager of the Communications Division. As Deb shared with me, more than 20 years of her career has largely been in the private sector, specializing in operations and business management. And I think immediately when she begins talking about her experience working with the community on World Refugee Day and engaging a really special ambassador there, you'll see where that all comes into play. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our first speaker, Deb Coffey, to share her story.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here today, and I hope that some of the things that we've learned in planning World Refugee Day here in Salt Lake City will be beneficial to you. I believe in creating things, all things, to be transparent and duplicatable. It's just a business philosophy that I have, and so I think it has really applied planning for World Refugee Day. So I'll just we have a lot to talk about in a short amount of time, so I want to try to stay really on track about the event, but I want to introduce to you something done here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that sort of preempted this new World Refugee Day event and concept, and that is that we have an ambassador to our refugee community here in Utah. His name is Thurl Bailey. He is a very well-known former NBA basketball player here, and there's a slide of him actually at World Refugee Day, our naturalization ceremony there, as you see. He has been appointed by Governor Gary R. Herbert here in Utah, and his job essentially is to be the liaison between the welcoming community and the governor, in him to understand what needs are of refugees and the community, and how do we really come together to support one another and to out all of our strengths that we all have and to really impact our community in a positive way. So I see a question. No, he is not a former refugee. He, however, is very passionate and lives in our community, and he believes that his platform, if you will, from having a great career in the NBA, he was in the NBA for almost 17 years, it really, in his terms, he would say it very much blessed his life, and he wants to give back to our local community here in other ways. And so I think having an ambassador for us has shifted the dynamics and the ability to bring people and their awareness level so much, and it's impacted us in so many ways that I really wanted to touch on that before I kind of go into our event. For those of you that might have additional questions, or we can get into later about our ambassador. So World Refugee Day here in Utah has always been an important day. it was actually contracted out to an organization that actually did some small scale refugee services, and they had this event, a venue that it wasn't particularly pleasing. It just happened to be that there was no cost associated with it, and it happened to work that, a local organ would donate the space. And so the event, in my estimation, it kind of got sidetracked and it got stuck. It really did get stuck in this venue that wasn't where the mainstream community would ever go and support. And so there were some issues going on there in years past. I think that from my perspective, when I was asked to take this event over about 18 months ago, I analyzed the event at this location. I asked myself, even then when I wasn't in charge of this, when I was actually attending as a guest, I had so many questions in my mind as to what was the purpose, really, what is the purpose of the event? And so, long story short, now it came full circle. About 7 months after that, I was actually given the responsibility to take this event back over and for the Department of Workforce Services and revitalize it. So I asked myself the first question that I think anyone would say, and that is, what do we need to change? We have very strong relations with all of our community partners, our resettlement agencies, and those folks that help support refugees. And so my first, Q&As went out to those partners, and that is, what do you need? Because this event, in my mind, as I was reshaping it, I wanted to make sure that in the end we all were reaping benefit, including the refugees, but no, I didn't say that. I just saw a question that said, do you say help the poor refugees? And no, I didn't say that. As this event started to take shape, I asked myself, what is it that we like to I apologize if I said that. That certainly, I didn't mean to say that. Anyway, the community partners needed additional volunteers. That's the main focus that I wanted to stay on for the year, and so I will make sure that we had a vehicle to actually get them additional volunteers as we were going to plan the event. So I looked at trying to engage the mainstream community to come out and support the event. I felt it was really important that we looked at the venue. Where is it we were holding World Refugee Day, and how is it that we could bring and come to a location that would actually their mainstream public be in attendance doing something at this venue. So we found a wonderful park. It's called Liberty Park. It's a very well-known public park in Salt Lake City that is very well attended for many reasons. It's just a beautiful gathering place. So we set out to get a permit, and that was what I thought. I think it says here we thought that I said help support refugees. That is what I believe it. So we'll not belabor that issue anymore and stay on with our event planning. But Liberty Park is a park where there are hundreds and hundreds of mainstream community people that come and attend for various reasons. So this event, or this venue, I think, was the best choice, given the fact that it was in close proximity to a lot of our refugees here in Salt Lake City, as well as, again, it was a public venue that we could all enjoy. So that was my first goal, was to go and secure the location and move it. So I have to ask myself the who, what, why, where, when, and how. The who is really going to be putting this event on, and it was my job to make sure that the event was pulled off, if you will, and planned. And so the first thing we did was we set up organizational committees, and I'm just going to run down a brief list of committees that we organized, and they included volunteers, community partners, resettlement agencies, their staff, anyone that is currently involved in supporting refugees. And so one on the list is the event application and the permits, and that would be for the park. Number two was, as a government agency, there were some things that we wanted to do at our event, and we do not have the authority to utilize any funding out of our department to do that. So we needed to partner with a nonprofit here locally. It was a really important component, and that was to find a nonprofit that would help partner with us to execute this event. The third thing was a volunteer component, and that was to engage all the volunteers that we need to put on host the event. The fourth is our entertainment committee and our ceremony. We have a naturalization ceremony. This slide right here, these are three of the candidates that actually received the naturalization here at the event. It was a beautiful ceremony, and we can talk a little bit more about that if we have time later. The fourth is our food vendors. At World Refugee Day, we really wanted to make sure that we had one of the major issues for the participants, and especially for the refugee families. A lot of the refugees themselves did not have the ability to purchase food at the event in the years past. So we made a concentrated effort to make sure that the refugees not only understood that this event was free, and the event was free to everyone, by the way, but refugees also were provided a meal at charge to them. It was a really big component. But back to the food vendors themselves, we actually had all of our food vendors were refugees themselves, and they had businesses, either catering businesses, they happened to have food carts, they had full-fledged restaurants. But it was wonderful to have that representation of all of these, kind of going back to what Hannah was saying, all of the refugees themselves showing that they are giving back to our community by owning and having businesses. And so, and sharing their culture through food is such an important, concept. So it was wonderful. The next component we have is we actually put together what we call a global market. And inside the global market, it was sort of the central hub of our event. We had refugees that were demonstrating their crafts or art, whatever it was that they happened to be, that they specialize in, that they brought that culture from their countries. We had them on site. Some of them actually sold goods, just demonstrated it. We had some that did sketching. It was just a wonderful combination of refugees showing their culture in this whole market. We also had children's activities that were centered around education, trying to help children understand that there's a great big world out there, and we wanted them to understand how dynamic it was and them to walk away with a little bit of, and in addition to fun things, of course. So the next category we had was our structures, which includes all of the tents and the whole layout of the event. The next section I have is our branding and marketing, our media, and our website. As you can see in this slide, you can see behind you, these are all the community partner tents, and we had, I believe that you all have the ability to look at a PDF that has all of our marketing and branding materials in it. So we'll kind of get back to that. We also put up a website and the media strategy around World Refugee Day and World Refugee, the actual month activities that we do here in Utah were phenomenal. So we'll touch back on that. The element of the day included a soccer tournament and a final soccer game. This park, I want to point out just something, because I think it initially it was a limitation. However, belief is there's always a way if we kind of get creative and look at different options. So this park itself does not have a large enough green space for a real full-size soccer field, but it did have a big enough space to hold a soccer game. So what we did was we reached out to one of our partners that had portable soccer goals. We had someone come in and stripe a field. We brought the goals, and we just reduced the size of the soccer field just ever so slightly so that we could have all of these great things going on at once within our venue. So that actually worked out great. And that was the game that was held there. There was a tournament for an entire week with all of our refugee soccer teams that actually built up to final championship game. The 10th item that I have was our community park booth in addition to the Refugee Month events. And so that kind of gives you an idea. Our soccer teams are mixed and others are not. They're very, they're varied. And I can get you the list of all of the soccer teams. After the call, I can get you that. I believe the winner year was the South Sudan team. I would have to just go back and look. It was a really busy day for me. They actually received their award on stage for the championship game. So let me go back to now we know who's going to participate. We know what we need to do. We've got these large classifications of groups, and so I think that's where the planning begins. Where we're going to have our event, and we know when we're going to have our event. Now, for each of you in your own communities, the actual day itself might not work out. So our event this year is actually on June 7th, and I'll tell you just briefly why it is. We felt like it was more important to actually have our event in the same location each year than it was to cause confusion and to move our event. So I think that's up to you in your own communities, what you do and when you do it. We actually take the entire month of June and highlight and showcase events that are going on with our community partners. And so that is part of our month of educating all of the community on all of the wonderful things that refugees provide and bring our community. So it's not just about the day. And probably the last most important thing, I'm kind of running out of time, is how we went about our media strategy. We received, it was just over $37,000 of earned media at no cost to us. I think because we had our ambassador, we had a plan. It was a very solid and concrete plan of what it was that we were doing, and we really made an effort to have him out in front of local news stations, the local media. And, you know, it kind of goes back to some people that were making comments about educating. And our ambassador, Earl Bailey, was and has always been so passionate about everything that refugees can give back to us. And he really is genuine when he articulates I guess, bits and pieces of education that he can share. And he gives a message that is strong and it's ill, if you will, and he really wants people to understand that, you know, if we all come together and support one another, then our community will be stronger. I'd like to just look at just a couple of questions that have come through, and I'll address those really quickly. Questions is, who were the partners for the education piece? And I'm assuming we're talking about in the children's activity tent and in the education piece. We have our research agencies, and we also have a couple of other very large partners in the community that offer services to refugees, and those folks were the ones that stepped up and took these individual sections that I just mentioned, the 10 sections, and so each person dedicated a staff or two, and then we created teams that worked on all the individual pieces that came together. So we worked together and had meetings and met individually, and we always had a centralized location and a point person, which was me, and so I coordinated on the back end all of the efforts, if you will, and how this was going to be executed. We do have a school district local school district that was involved, and that served about 12,000 refugees. But they were part of a subcommittee, if you will. They didn't head one up. So, yeah, that's time.
Yeah, I'm going to hold further questions because I want to come back to some of the themes that you've talked about and also have the CRSA folks answer some similar questions. So let's hold off on questions for now. We've seen some great ones come through the lines and we're getting those organized. That was really fantastic, and I think everyone is just so taken by the scope and size of what you've been able to accomplish, and also just the effectiveness of Ambassador. We've gotten some good questions around that. So let's hold those for the moment. And what I'm going to do now is introduce the folks that are here in our office in Atlanta from the Coalition of Refugee Service Agencies, which is just a powerhouse working here locally. I'm here by Emily Pelton, who's the Executive Director of Refugee Family Services, along with Matthew George, who is the Director of Strategy and Community Organizing, who also directs the Refugee Organizing and Action Collaborative with Refugee Family Services, as well as J.D. McCrary, who is the Executive Director of the IRC in Atlanta, and together they're going to be sharing the impressive story of some of the work that they've been leading here.
Great. Can everyone hear me? We're here representing CRSA, what we affectionately call CRSA, the Coalition of Refugee Service Agencies, that was officially born about 3 years ago now. And we have grown considerably, both in scope of services as well as the professionalism of what we have to offer. In addition to the strength of the partnership has just been overwhelming. The genesis of the organization actually goes back several decades. Atlanta has had a strong history of refugee resettlement dating back to 1980 and even a little prior to that. And there have always been a set of strong directors for the 5 or 6 resettlement agencies that have been in Atlanta for all those years. And there's always been a strong partnership between those agencies, and even when it was just the resettlement agencies directors meetings, they were consistently working together. All of the directors met once a month, and that goes back for years. In 2011, a couple of things happened that really required us to maybe get a little more organized, which is where CRSA was truly born. And we were getting some pushback from state government and some other things, questions about resettlement and resettlement services and those sorts of things. So we decided that we needed to take a more proactive stance in promoting the benefits of refugees, the benefits of the services that we provide, and really get together and start speaking with one voice. And the benefits that come from being such a strong partnership really are that we do speak with one voice, that there's not a lot of daylight between the positive aspects that we promote to the community about refugees and refugee services. And for those of you that maybe are working in communities where there are several of you, whether you're a VOLAG or a service agencies, or even if you're an organization that just has one refugee program, or have some refugees in some of your more mainstream programs, I would very much recommend that you do start working together. I mean, this has been a wonderful partnership, and the strength really does come from all of us working together. It's amazing how well that has worked out. So if you're not working with your peers and your counterparts across town in some of your areas, I would very much recommend that you do start working together. You start communicating together, because even if it's just 2 or 3 of you, I guarantee you that your voice is going to be that much more significant if you are on the same page and you're advocating together.
This is Emily Pelton speaking. I'm the current chair of CRSA, which has been a pleasure. And I couldn't agree more with G that the unity of our group has been an asset. And I think the reason that we started to feel the need to get more intentional about the work and forming a coalition was that we were feeling some pressure from the state government. People were asking asking questions about resettlement that were not grounded in facts, but were creating perceptions in the public sphere that we needed to counter. And we started to realize that we didn't have a lot of tools that weren't just the individual collateral of each agency. So we started to put together some materials and documents that we felt could help make the point about how refugees were contributing to the community as a whole, and also the work that each organization was doing to contribute to that. So we wanted to create an annual report which combine impact of the organizations in various service areas like employment, but also youth engagement, other areas, as well as facts and figures about resettlement and the economic impact. We had also a short piece called Refugees in Georgia, the Facts. And that has gone through a lot of iterations because as we started showing it to legislators and other people, we realized there were a lot of misconceptions that was important for us to address. So not just getting out what we thought were important facts about our programs, but responding to perceptions. And when you frame a one-pager that way, it all starts to look very different. So we thought that that was important. And as Matthew's going to talk about here in a minute, we decided to create a joint legislative event that we would put on together called American Celebration that would mobilize the community, including refugees, including providers, community supporters, and just regular citizens to get out and talk to legislators about refugees. And we found that to be really successful, and each year we've done it, we've learned more, we've improved, we've figured out, where our weak spots are and how to make it better. And that's really helped galvanize us because it gives us something to work on together. And I think it's given us a sense of collective success, and that investment and that result, I think, have mobilized us and inspired us to how we could just continue to do more together as a group. Right, funded per se. We're seeking funding for our operations. We're not seeking to become a separate organization, but we're seeking funding to support some of our work, and that would certainly strengthen us. But I think we're all really happy with what we've been able to do just by the sheer force of will of collaboration. And we've gotten media attention, and we've found people on both sides of the aisle who are willing to support us and were willing to sponsor our materials this year, which was a big step forward from where we were a year ago. So all of those specific activities, working on those together, have really been galvanizing and, fun. And I think we all view each other as colleagues now, and I think it's spilled over into better cooperation on day-to-day program issues outside of policy issues. Matthew's had a huge role in the American Celebration, and he's going to say a few words about how we have put on and what some special kind of elements of that event have been.
Thank you, Lee, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. As has been mentioned, a coalition of refugee service agencies here in Georgia organizes an annual New American Celebration, we call it, at the Georgia State Capitol during the legislative session. Formerly resettled refugees and their contributions, increasing awareness and understanding of the formerly resettled refugee community among Georgia's lawmakers. We contributions to the state, economic, social, cultural. We ensure state lawmakers have accurate facts about the community and about the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program operating here in Georgia, and also having the opportunity to engage lawmakers one-on-one to share personal stories of the resilience of the newcomers, the new Americans who are strengthening communities all over the state of Georgia. To deliver the event in 2013 in response to some of the ignorance and inaccurate information that J.D. and Emily mentioned earlier, we were finding about this community among public officials in the state. Local agencies realized the need to increase the knowledge and understanding, and so we built upon a pre-existing, although smaller event, to try and reach all the members of the legislature in an intentional and meaningful way. This event, as has been mentioned by Emily, we met with some conservative legislators, people outside of our normal vocal allies. These conservative legislators had also been targeted by anti-immigrant and anti-refugee voices. The directors within the CRSA cultivated allies to help them craft messages that would have impact for people on that side of the aisle. We traded ultimately on three main messages with bipartisan appeal. One, focusing on the idea of shared values, looking at economic impact, and three, the fundamental American value of being a welcoming community. Coalitions assembled a lot of materials that we put together in a red folder to distribute to all 236 lawmakers in the state of Georgia. They included the annual report that Emily mentioned, some letters of support that we've received in recent years from the Georgia Poultry Federation, a large property management company in the area, as well as reprints of articles from major and local newspapers in the state. Importantly, all of the organizations came together under one banner, under the banner of CRSA, and on printed materials, we have a logo that you saw on the previous slide, as well as all of the logos of the 13 agencies that participate in this coalition. But as you mentioned, we hit all of these messages consistently and uniformly as a coalition, regardless of a large event like New Americans or even in smaller one-on-one interactions that any of the agencies may have with public officials. We tried to cultivate some look and feel, some branding elements, and everyone had a bright red CRSA tote bag with our logo. That inspired a lot of comments, people wondering, okay, who are the people with the tote bags? We had people asking us for bags, and that also helped make our presence known there at the State Assembly that day. The event was on Wednesday, February the 5th this year. We had more than 100 participants attending this year, and it's a half-day event from 8 a.m. to noon. These participants consist of New Americans themselves, formerly resettled refugees, asylees, and other members of Atlanta's immigrant community, other local community members, representatives of local government, volunteers, agency staff and board members, and other stakeholders and partners, such as representatives from area universities. The event consisted of a few different aspects of legislative engagement. Primarily, we had three components. One was a legislative breakfast that where we had open invitation for lawmakers and their staffs to come get some food, interact with New Americans, with people who work at the service agencies in the room. The event was catered by a culinary arts training program at a local high school where many of the formerly resettled refugee students attend. Speakers at this event from the state legislature, from local government in the city of Clarkston, where many refugees initially reside, as well as the House Minority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader here in the state of Georgia. And we had sort of cold calling, materials distribution, where we distributed folders, fact sheets, information to the offices of all 236 senators and members of the House of Representatives here in Georgia. Again, highlighted the economic, cultural, and social impact of this community in the state of Georgia. And we had direct meetings across the rope, as it's called here in the state, where you call members of the state legislature out of session and meet with them for a few minutes in the hallways at the legislature. Today, as I mentioned earlier, we were to hit all of the offices, some of which two or maybe even three times. But what we wanted to make ourselves known at the event and let them know that this is a constituency here in the state of Georgia. It's not just a constituency in one area where maybe many of the newcomers come to reside, but it's really making an impact throughout metropolitan Atlanta and throughout the state of Georgia. Even in the press, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had an article on the day of the event, as well as a week later, an A1 story above the fold about the resettlement program here in Georgia, and including the New American celebration which we held. We also did the full-color photo spread in a local newspaper called the DeKalb Champion, and points that we created for the event, as I mentioned earlier, to reach a bipartisan audience, used to inform a guest column in a local newspaper, the Marietta Daily Journal, written by the former president of the Southern Baptist Convention in support of the refugee resettlement program here in Georgia. So you can see that the dividends from the event were not just the immediate impact, but also have allowed us to continue to develop better messages that respond to what audiences are interested in hearing and also allow us to get across the messages that we want to impart.
Great to all of you, and I think we can clearly see a lot of themes around the issue of collaboration and how that has helped groups come together around a unified message and unified branding, I think in the case of both events. And I'll get in a little bit there because we've had some questions around how those collaborations have come together and some of the motivations that have drawn us all to work together, some of which have been positive motivations, but also sometimes negative. And of some of those negative motivations, like an outside threat, has that been, and I'll ask this question first of CRSA, and then Deb, we'll jump to you. A motivating factor, does that even matter in terms of the motivations for driving you together as a group to collaborate around some of these programs?
I mean, I would say the initial, as JD pointed out, there was this collaborative relationship going on, particularly among resettlement agencies. But I think there were some very well-defined and alarming trends that started kind of all of a sudden here in Georgia that did break together, and I think there's nothing like a common thread to unite you. And there was a very quick realization that if we were going to respond to that threat, that we all would have to work together, that no one working individually was going to be able to respond to it, that was necessary. But I think at the same time, if that had been all that held us together, it wouldn't have held us together this long. We would have gone further. We wouldn't have, come to where we are now. And I think we started to see very quickly all the benefits of collaboration and bringing in more people. And we're about to go into a strategic planning phase where we're talking about actually maybe adding, members to our coalition and figuring out how to bring in more community organizations. So I think it takes time. It's not easy to find the moments for these meetings when we're all busy, but I think we're all seeing the benefit of it. And I think also in our community, those of us who do local fundraising particularly, we're starting to get the same feedback consistently that donors didn't understand the difference between us. Why are there 7 or 8 refugee organizations here? Aren't you all doing the same thing? Isn't there redundancy? So we started to realize that we really had to work together on helping to create a common message about the value of our work, show that we are working together, and to show that there is impact of our work. And we all could come out with a similar positive message rather than just sort of looking at the narrow space that we wanted to carve out our brand value, that would be a better result for everybody. And I think that that's become a self-evident truth that no one would argue with here now. So it's not easy to get started, but I think that if it had just been that we were all facing concern threats, at some point, collaboration could have broken down because we might not all have agreed, how to respond to that. What's happened is we're seeing all these benefits of working together and opportunities, and I think that's what's driving us forward as a group and getting us excited about working together.
That's great. Before I move on to Deb, I just want to follow up on that, thinking of others who might be working in communities who are about collaborating either with other resettlement organizations or with other community partners. Where would you start? What would be advice to those kinds of organizations?
Well, I think it's easiest to start with partners that you know and where there's some kind of basic trust or some kind of aligned interest. And you probably know who those people are. And I think what we've done is we've just slowly, broadened our circle. And individual members have brought in more individual members and said, hey, I'm working with this organization. They're interested in what we're doing. Can I bring them along? I think it's good to start a little bit small, just so the conversation can be managed and it can be frank, and there can be honesty in that space and there's trust. But I think if you keep it too small, it can start to be a little of, extending your belly button together, and that doesn't take you forward either. So I think it's good to start with a group of people who understand and have common goals and values, and you can start to widen the circle, and I think that's kind of we are now. But we're doing that very intentionally because we realize there's so much value in the group that we've built. We want to make sure we maintain that just as we bring more people into the story.
Great, thank you. I turn now to Deb and just ask you to speak a little bit to this theme of collaboration position and how that's been helpful or challenging maybe in your work in Utah?
I think it's so important for us, especially with World Refugee Day and really truly everything that we do with refugees. Our community partners are invaluable to us, and everybody brings something to the table that I think is important and that should be recognized. And so as a group, when we come together for the event, our focus was on their needs. We were the vehicle, and we were, in charge of the event, but it really was about what their needs were. And so including all of the people to the best of our ability that do service and help provide needed services for refugees, to look at what their needs are, which for them that year, as is this year, is volunteers and volunteerism. And so it's a key component for us, and I think our relationships are stronger and better than they've ever been. And I will also say that last year's event brought for them, the feedback was that they had the very best results they've ever had. And so I think as we continue to work together and we do strive for a common goal, then the results will be there, and it will just continue to build the relationships and the trust moving forward as we expand projects and collaborations. So
that's one of the things that really struck me, Deb, and I think I've heard from some of the comments that are coming through from the audience, that you were able to pull in both some of the organizations that have traditionally worked with refugees, as well as the broader community and folks that may have known nothing about refugees. And I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the messages that were important in reaching those two distinct audiences.
Well, I want to share with you that prior to us taking this event last year, the attendance was truly about 300 people. Last year, our estimation is about 4,000 plus. It was, what we did was we really wanted to look at what brings people out to support different causes in communities. And, there are a lot of people who support very direct things, and they have very specific interests, but there are also those that are out there that just truly take their families and children out to events. And so we wanted to make sure that this event really spoke to everyone in the community. And so whether you intentionally came to World Refugee Day because you thought it was interesting, or maybe you just were out looking for something fun to do at the park that day, but once you got there, then you were going to receive some full education and kind of this eye-opening experience of the great community and culture and everybody coming together. I think that it was important to look at every aspect, and I think that that was a component that was missing with prior years. And so what we tried to do was make this, it truly is a day of celebration for refugees and all of the wonderful cultures and foods and great things that they offer us. And so our event showcased all those very things with food, with entertainment, with all of the activities, and really then anchored with our community partners coming in and attracting the volunteers that were kind of wandering around the event, if you will, that were looking for a way to participate in and get involved. So
that's great. I'll ask a sort of follow-up question that's and sort of brings together a couple questions that have come in from the audience around your refugee ambassador specifically, which I think is just such a interesting idea, and I think a lot of folks are curious about. And a couple questions around the ambassador that have come in is just sort of the choice of him in particular, why choose somebody from the receiving community as opposed to a refugee themselves. Somebody else asked a question just noting that the refugee ambassador is a racial minority, and is he able to really attract the dominant mainstream Utah community to causes that impact refugees. So I'm sure that's something that you have thought out just in your choice of him, and how have you felt that he's been able to resonate, and what was just some of your thinking around him in particular?
I think that when you look at our community, and of course I want to make sure that it's known that everyone has they have their own individual communities. And Salt Lake City, for instance, it's a very, I would call it a fairly tight community, and we really do support, I think, a lot of our, athletes and people come here, and we hope that we can continue to do that. As far as why or who it was, I don't know as though there was a very large selection process. It wasn't something that was, I thought about for a long time, but this is a man who wants to contribute and give back to our community, and he actually has, like I said before, a platform to do so. And many of our communities have many people that are like him, and he has taken a very particular and strong interest in refugees and wanting to help bring awareness and education to the mainstream community. That is really the focus of why we have an ambassador. And through his utilization of social media and other, things he does, it's given us opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have had. And I think that has brought, again, so much awareness. And as we were listening to things and presentations about the legislature, and Thurl Bailey is getting calls daily about what can I do? I've got a volunteer project because people are now associating him with wanting to give back to the community through service for refugees or other, organizations that do great work for refugees. So I think it's just, I guess I think we'll be asking something that there's really no answer for here in Salt Lake City, and that is a sort of a formal selection process, and that really is a little bit different than the way it evolved here. Like, this is someone that wants to give back and is looking to use his time and use his abilities to mobilize people to help our community. I hope that answers a little of your question.
I think an answer that is a beautiful example of a great reframing, and I think speaking to the unity that you've created through the work that you're doing is really powerful, and just in the way that you answered that question tells me that I think through your work you're able to transcend some of those concerns that can come up in communities. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a couple of questions that are coming in just around the nitty-gritty and also around reaching some unusual suspects. So this we'll make this one of the last questions, but I want to go to the CRSA folks and then back to Deb to talk a bit about who some of the people have been that you've been able to pull in that maybe you could never have imagined engaging before, and a little bit on how you were able to do that.
I might talk to that a little bit, and Emily, you can follow me up. I think one of the more surprising things is that we found was once we started doing the public outreach and the public advocacy, especially legislators, is those who you assume were not going to be receptive to your message actually were, very much so. That was surprising. So I would, for those on the call, don't make an assumption based on someone's political party or their background or something like that. You'd be surprised at some of the allies that we have found by simply doing the outreach. And don't just assume that this group is your friend and this group is against you. And we've actually found a broad variety of support. And I think that was interesting to us. I mean, I learned something and know about the group, but don't make those assumptions. You'd be surprised at the level of support that you can get across the board. Once you start promoting accurate data and good stories, it's surprising, the positive feedback that you'll get back.
Right. I mean, again, back to the advantage of a coalition approach, several of our partners are faith-based organizations and have some very strong connections to churches, which are a pretty powerful institution, especially here in the South. And what we found is that through those connections, in fact, we found people who be politically conservative, but also very motivated and inspired by the story of refugees from the perspective of their faith, and that's been very important. And this recent article that was written by Reverend Wright is a very powerful person, very influential person in Georgia, and he was motivated to write a piece in response to something very negative that was written, and that we were very concerned about, full of a lot of inaccurate information, and he was motivated to do that. But he, the information came through, and we worked with him through one of our faith partners. And so, that there turns out to be a whole sort of group of people in Atlanta who we think may be willing to be a little active in speaking up in our behalf, and they're coming at it from that perspective. I think what they don't like to see is, some individuals who are out there saying very negative things. They don't think that that's appropriate. They don't think that it's fair play. And, when we present ourselves as people who are out there trying to talk about what we do, give the honest facts, help people need, they're very motivated to be on our side. And so that's been terrific to discover. I mean, we've had to do the work of discovering it through personal and professional relationships. But when we brought people in to meet with the group, the meetings have gone, surprisingly well, and it's been, it's been reassuring to us. There are folks out there who help us and who are concerned when they see people saying things that are true. I also just say that the power of addressing economic facts. There's been a characterization of refugees as a drain at very high levels of government here, an economic drain, and just by putting together some facts and figures about the refugee clients are earning in employment programs among the organizations in our coalition and how much that's contributing to state revenues. It's very back of the envelope analysis, but it's really helped us to beat back this assertion that there's just resources being pulled away. And we've just gone to very different stances. Instead of defending ourselves, we are out there talking about the contributions, the assets, the value, and refugees are really contributing to Georgia, and they're very needed in our workforce right now. So just by coming forward with those arguments, we found people who are interested in talking to us on that plane. So all those things have helped us reframe some of the negative criticism into something that we feel confident and good talking about.
Great. And everyone on the phone to know that we're going to be sharing examples of media stories, talking points, anything that we can give you in addition to the toolkit itself that gives you an idea of what some of this work has looked like on the ground. Deb, I'll come back to you around that question of unusual suspects. And just very briefly, who are some folks that you've pulled in that you might not have ever imagined that you could have or had in the past?
Well, we were, for the first time ever last year for our World Refugee Day, there was a substantial grant that was put out by the city for events, and people were able to apply for grants. In that, for whatever reason, they were unable to secure or get any additional funding for World Refugee Day, but we were able to secure an additional $5,000 towards this event and from the city itself. And I think that was probably our biggest and I guess greatest and surprise, and that is because the city really, this goes hand in hand with their mission and vision, and so really incorporating anyone that's out there that has similar missions or visions that can help to build up your event, I think is important to look at. And again, if you're repackaging or looking at a different way to put your event on, I think that if you were denied in the past, I would look at those folks and I would really look at messaging, and I'm hearing that over and over. Susan, you're talking about it. I mean, it's all about the way that you package the message and how you actually execute that to the leaders and the people that understand behind the scenes and what impact that will make on the citizens of their various communities. And I think that's really, really important. So I would say that was our biggest surprise, if you will. And not that the city is not engaged with refugees, but this was a different angle and a different funding stream that was utilized this past year. And we did receive that grant again for this June's event too.
What a story. Thank you so much, Deb, for sharing that. And I want to just thank both of our sets of speakers here for sharing the excellent work that you're doing. I know this won't be the end of sharing these stories, so we'll continue to get them out to folks along with everyone's website, just so you can continue to learn. I know also that a lot of the folks who are on call today have interesting stories of your own, so we want to keep encouraging you to share those with us, including around World Refugee Day. We know that's coming up soon. Many of you have already been in the thick of planning for a while. Some of you may be starting anew, so I really encourage you to check out what Deb has done. I know we got through the lines here that Youth Great program coming up, so please share those with us, and we will continue to share everything that's happening throughout this vibrant network with all of you. I'm going to continue ahead and just talk really briefly about stories. I heard some great stories on the call today, and so I want us to think about stories at two levels. Obviously, there are the stories of the folks that you are working with, and it's so critically important to get it out there because that's the vehicle that will help people connect emotionally with this issue. Obviously, we don't want to be sharing stories without people's permission and willingness and interest in doing their own stories. The power of personal stories to really impact people's perceptions and understanding of this issue is so compelling. And we've talked about making sure that those are stories that really communicate strength and resiliency is key. Likewise, the stories of the work that you are doing and how communities are coming together. I think we've heard in both of the examples that were shared today how the idea of many groups coming together to collaborate, of other people getting involved, of volunteers maybe who have experienced, the power of interactions with refugees. All of those are really compelling stories that your communities need to be hearing about. We have a number of those stories that were did in our toolkit, things that have inspired you. These are just a few examples were shared with us. There are many more in the toolkit, and we hope that you'll continue to share those with us. There are groups all over the country who are thinking in creative ways about how to get stories out there. This is an example from Dayton, Ohio. The Welcome Dayton program features on their website the stories of both immigrants and members of the receiving community, like this individual. Another great example from Washington, D.C. This was a campaign that went up all over the metros. I'm a proud immigrant, and I contribute to D.C. So I think you can see the theme in some of the messages and stories that we're sharing today. This is a great example that I really want to highlight. The IOM, the International Office of Migration, is doing through a campaign with the U.S. Association for International Migration, which is their partner in the United States, and Welcoming America, a project that features the theme of Migrants Contribute. This is a global campaign that began with a launch in Washington, D.C. on metro rail and bus routes, and they're hoping to expand it to other locations in the United States. The campaign highlights the diverse skills that migrants bring, points of view, determination, showcasing the positive contribution of migrants. So I think what this says to me, first of all, is that this is a movement that is really taking hold all over the world, that those of you who are on the call are really a part of in trying to reshape the way that migrants are perceived. And immediately, these are images that are available to all of us. So if you think that this would be of benefit to you, I encourage you to visit the website, migrantscontribute.com, and we're also happy to help connect you if you think that these would be helpful in your community. Some more examples. About World Refugee, I also want to mention that National Welcoming Week is going to be coming up in September, the week of September 13th. This is a national event that we host in partnership with communities all over the country, celebrating the contributions of newcomers and bringing newcomers and receiving communities together in a spirit of unity through service projects, arts projects, soccer you can see here, governors, mayors, elected officials have chosen to issue proclamations and resolutions during this period of time. It's a chance for all of us to be celebrating the work that we're doing together, and we encourage you to check out welcomingweek.org to learn more about this and find out how you can get involved. Ask folks, I know that not everybody can see the chat function. I would love to hear from those of you in the audience. You have a celebration that's upcoming, whether it's part of World Refugee Day or maybe Welcoming Week or maybe a new idea that's been sparked by some of the things you've heard today. What's an event or an opportunity to celebrate refugees that is that you're planning on? I would love to get some ideas coming up from the audience, and I'll share those back with you all. Folks in Houston who will be hosting a special celebration as part of World Refugee Day. And let's see, we are hearing from Florence, who's doing an international fashion show. What a fabulous idea. Another group, this is Dr. Faith Nibbs. The MIP Awards is going to honor businesses for living wage and career laddering for refugees. Something on existing events, an international soccer tournament. That sounds really exciting, from Sarah Russ. Alexandra Hackett, potluck summer picnic where refugee clients and former clients bring in traditional food, sharing cultures like typical American foods. In Florida, Leslie Kaplan is planning a series of dinners cooked by teams of people, including both immigrants and long-standing local community, with facilitated discussions about cultural similarities and differences. Some great things are planned on World Refugee Day. In Omaha, cultural performances, another fashion show, refugee healthcare, Richmond, Virginia, an open house at the largest state agencies that also hosts the State Refugee Coordinator. And it's so exciting to see just the diversity of different activities that are happening all over the country celebrating refugees. So I really hope that some of the messages and ideas that we've shared today have sparked some new ideas and some inspiration for those of you on the call. I'm going to read one more option that I see here because Chambers of Commerce caught my interest from Steve Gold. In conjunction with local Chambers of Commerce, a breakfast of nations in Macomb County, featuring the state of Michigan's new Office of New Americans. Very neat. So we'll try to get some of these ideas out there, keep them coming to us. I want to just again thank our panelists so much for being part of this conversation and just for the wonderful and inspiring work that you do every day in our communities. I want to challenge us all to think about what that Google search could look like 2 years from now if we could come back and see the positive contributions that refugees are making as the highlight of the work we know is happening every day in our communities. So we'll leave you. And please feel free to get in touch with me or anyone else from the Welcoming America team. We'll also share information about our speakers today so that I can reach out to them. Thank you for your engagement on this call, for your great questions, and please don't forget to fill out the survey, which you'll be getting when you exit the webinar. Thank you, and have a great day.